He who sat confronting me at the other side of the table, steeped in the light of the hanging lamp, did not belong to our day. Outside this illumined circle, the night swallowed up the surrounding room and all that was in it. We were suspended in a fathomless universe of shadows. I had before me a face of unnatural parchment pallor, which had lost all suggestion of association with a living and contemporaneous human being, but belonged instead to a ghost, an evocation. Past and present fused in his brain, and the fusion was reflected in his speech. In his recital he sometimes used the past tense and sometimes the present, as though the incidents were still unrolling. I set down the words exactly as he uttered them. I am the commander of the Antonia fortress. My titular rank is that of Ciliarch. The Jews call me hegemon. The importance and delicacy of the task entrusted to me, that of keeping a restraining hand on a people as strange and rebellious as the Jews, called for the appointment of a commander who united the abilities of the soldier with those of the administrator. I also fulfilled the functions of liaison officer, and am attached to the political section belonging to Pontius Pilate, together with whom I came into this wild country. But in the course of my official duties I made numerous journeys between Jerusalem and Caesarea, also between Caesarea and Antioch, where I visited the legate Vitellius, who is our ruler and commander-in-chief. It was also in line of service that I proceeded to the neighboring tetrarchs. I was in Caesarea Philippi and in Tiberias. On one occasion I even found myself as far afield as the Tetrarchate of Galilee, where Herod Antipater maintained his fortress Machaerus on a stony mountain beyond the Dead Sea, surrounded by an ocean of sand and wilderness. I was the witness in that place of a scene which accorded well with its atmosphere of heat and desert winds, but I shall have occasion to speak of it again in its proper place. My acquaintance with Pontius Pilate dates back to the time when we were both serving in the legions commanded by Germanicus in his war against the Germans. Pilate's rank was then no higher than mine, though he had the advantage of precedence. We were both centurions, but with excellent prospects of promotion. I served throughout that entire campaign under Germanicus, took part in the fiercest battles, accompanied him on the most difficult marches, helped cut a way through the thickest, blackest, and most tangled forest of that wild country of the German barbarians. I still bear on my body, to the glory of Rome and the honor of Caesar, the mark of wounds inflicted by spears and arrows sped from the shelter of trees and thickets by barbarian hands. I was with Germanicus when we took ship on that unknown river, whose waters are as dark as the forests that border it. I was with him when the storm carried us to unknown shores, where wild and warlike hordes awaited us. There were times when our commander led us through the blackness of the damp undergrowth, and death lurked all about us, either in the hidden swamp whose treacherous surface, covered with moss and leaves, could swallow up whole legions, or in the overhanging branches whence the battle-axe might suddenly descend to fling the marcher into eternal night. And yet we thrust forward into the lightless unknown, and had it not been for the jealous and cunning Caesar Tiberius, who begrudged our commander his victories, we would have carried the Roman eagles through the black forests and planted them among the peoples of the East, who have only one eye in the middle of their foreheads, and horns on either side. When we returned to Rome with our legions, we found ourselves in the shadow of the disfavor which fell upon our neglected and abandoned commander. But even then, Pilate already harbored high ambitions. He had in fact heard that the post of procurator of Judea had fallen vacant, and without delay he set himself in motion to obtain it. True, the province of Judea is a small, dull place, and its inhabitants are restless and warlike. Risings occur every month or two. But he had heard that in Judea the procurators became rich suddenly. Gratus, the displaced procurator, who had been recalled to Rome, acquired great wealth there, as it were, overnight. The noisy Jews of the country have a habit of competing among themselves for the position of high priest, and a wonderful position it is, too. The gold of all the Jews of the world flows into the treasury of the temple. There are 4 families entitled to fill that high office, and there is a wild scramble among them when it falls vacant. Brother betrays brother, son-in-law betrays father-in-law, Gratus put the high priesthood up for auction every year among the 4 wealthy priestly families, and let them run like racehorses for the juicy morsel. When Pilate learned that Judea was a cow with inexhaustible udders, he set his heart on the post and resolved to let nothing stand between himself and possession. And yet, how was he to go about it? His family connections were obscure and undistinguished. He was a Spaniard by birth. His father had entered the Roman nobility by betraying his countrymen, having been among the first to go over to the Romans. Family rank did not entitle Pilate to a place in the Senate, and he could not, therefore, aspire to a proconsular position. True, the procurator of Judea did not have to be of senatorial rank, but to become the procurator of any province, one had to be a somebody. He soon perceived that in Rome he could reach his goal only through 2 methods, flattery and treachery. In the court of Caesar Tiberius there was being brought up at that time his stepdaughter Claudia. Claudia was the daughter of Tiberius's wife Juliana. This same Juliana, after she had acquired a 3rd husband in Tiberius, abandoned herself to such orgies with slaves of the imperial court that her father Augustus, the reigning Caesar, began to fear an open scandal and banished her from Rome. It was in exile that she gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, sired by some Roman knight. This was Claudia. When the girl attained her 13th year, her mother sent her to her husband Tiberius to be educated, the latter having in the meantime inherited the purple from Augustus. Well, what education and upbringing meant at the court of Tiberius is known to all. That dissolute and treacherous fox, whose eyes were always lifted to the gods, affected to play the role of saint, and when the Senate offered to confer upon him the title of Father of his country, piously rejected it, and even pretended that it was against his will that he had assumed the heavy burdens of the Roman Empire. A slave of the Roman rabble, who never had the courage to take a stand against it, but victimized the aristocracy instead, Tiberius was a dissolute rake. Sick lust was written on his face, on the low forehead, the drooping lower lip, the narrow truncated jaw. All in all, the face of a bird of prey, expressive of cunning and base passion. No one in Rome ever knew what was in the Caesar's mind. Even his intimates were never certain how they stood with him, could not tell from day to day whether the trap had not been laid, the ruin prepared, as it was for the noble Germanicus. Such was the secretiveness of the man. And one of the passions of this Tiberius was to maintain at his court a school for little girls, whom he himself gave an upbringing. It is not hard to guess into what a pure soul little Claudia grew under his guidance. Her mother, the corrupt Juliana, had of course sent him the child of set purpose, hoping that this gift would restore her to the favor of the Caesar, her husband. Naturally, all Rome knew the story, which was repeated wherever the higher social circles assembled. Dignified senators in session whispered the details of Tiberius's educational methods in each other's ears to while away the tedium of the long speeches. Ho, it was rich material for the scurrilous matrons of Rome. When they assembled in the peristyles of their villas or in their gardens, they sent away their slaves, not because they were ashamed to talk of such matters in the presence of slaves, but rather because they were afraid of being reported, and abandoned themselves to delicious conversation concerning the Caesar and his school. Obviously, no Roman noble with a grain of self-respect would stoop to pick up the leavings dropped from Tiberius's table. The aristocracy trembled at the thought that any day the old Caesar would order one of them to marry little Claudia, so that her reputation might be considered re-established. At this pass there suddenly appeared a volunteer, none other than our Pontius Pilate. Pilate began by manifesting a tender and most respectful regard for the little Claudia. He could stand for hours under the columns of the imperial palace on the Palatine, or by the exit of the Circus Maximus, waiting till her slaves carried her by in her litter, for an outing or a visit to a temple. He ordered from the goldsmiths of Rome the most exquisitely wrought rings and bracelets, not only for the hands of Claudia, but for the neck of her little cockatoo. He resorted to the use of soothsayers and Chaldean witches, of which there was no lack in Rome, as well as Alexandrian snake charmers. He hired them to stand at the gates of the palace and to cry out to the little Claudia, whenever she emerged, that a Roman knight of Spanish origin had been decreed for her in the stars. But his greatest help toward the fulfillment of his ambition and the conquest of Claudia's heart came, as it happened, from the Jews of Rome themselves.